Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Absolutely Podcast, the podcast specifically designed to help women defeat diet culture and live their dream healthy lifestyle. Today's episode is going to be a rapid fire Q&A all about calorie deficits. And so I'm going to answer all of the most popular questions surrounding calorie deficits and things I hear from my clients. And I also put a question box up on my Instagram page, so I'm going to be answering those as well. So today is going to be a very informative episode, and it will probably clear up a lot of the questions that you have been wondering about what the heck a calorie deficit is and how you can lose body fat for summer or whenever you are listening to this. So before we get into that, though, I wanted to do a little personal calorie deficit cut update for myself because if you didn't listen to the last episode, I currently am in a calorie deficit and I started now 2 weeks ago on the dot, 2 Fridays ago. I don't know. I just decided not to wait till Monday to start because you can start any day of the week, despite what anyone tells you. So I started 2 Fridays ago on my calorie deficit journey. And if you want to hear about what my specific protocols are, definitely go and listen to that episode because I go like in depth on exactly what I'm doing to a T. But today I'm just going to kind of fill you in on how things are going because it has been 2 weeks now, been in the deficit now for some time. So I have seen some results, which is exciting. So we're going to go over that today. As far as results go, I have lost 2 pounds on the scale, which is great. I was also kind of expecting that because I had just ended my cycle, and then a lot of times my water retention goes down and then like the scale goes down as well. So it kind of coincided with me starting the deficit, which was just like coincidental. So the scale did go down from like my starting point was like around like 150, 151. And I've been hovering around like the 148 range. And I have not gone lower than 148. I hit 148 on, let me check my scale app so you guys can get a kind of a glimpse on how I'm assessing my progress. I hit 148 on the 29th, the 25th, and the 24th. So we've been hovering in the 148s this whole week, and I hope for a low weigh-in soon. But if that doesn't happen, it is not the end of the world because the scale isn't everything when you are in a calorie deficit. So that is the progress that I have seen so far in the last 2 weeks. And what I am shooting for is between 0.5 to 1 pound per week. So we are right in that range, but it's interesting that all happened the first week. So I'm just patiently waiting, checking all the boxes, being consistent with everything, and I will start to see results. I will say just like in my body, I am feeling a little bit leaner, which is great. I haven't taken updated progress pictures just because it has only been like 2 weeks or so. And I've done enough cuts where I don't need to take progress photos every single week. And I don't have a coach that's looking over my stuff, which maybe would help, 1000% would help me. But I am going to be taking them every like few weeks to a month or so. So that way I can get kind of a better view on how I am doing. But since I've done this enough times, I'm pretty well versed in how to track my progress. So that is what this scale was doing. And one thing that I always forget about when I head into a calorie deficit and how my body personally responds is that I'm not a person that is like consistently hitting low weigh-ins. It's so interesting because I've coached now like 200 people at this point. 200 women, and some women will be the trender downers. That's definitely not a word, but they'll just trend down like day after day, week after week. And that is awesome. And they'll hit new low weigh-ins like pretty consistently, which good for them. I wish my body was that way. But it's definitely exciting to get on the scale in the morning and to see the scale has gone down a little bit. And it does keep you motivated and stuff. I would say more so than how my body typically responds. And a lot of women are in the same camp as me that I coach and that I've just seen as well. But my body likes to respond in like the whoosh effect way. And this is also not a scientific term, but this is how I explain it to my clients and how it makes sense in my brain as well. So I will hover at a certain weight, and then one day it just whooshes away and I'm down like 2-3 pounds, and it's really weird. So that's how my body personally responds. So I will be at literally in a plateau of my weight. Like I will kind of think like, is this even working? And then one day I'm like down 2 pounds, and then it just goes same thing. It'll be plateaued for a while and then go down another 2 pounds. So that's personally how my body responds. And a lot of the girls I coach, their body responds in a very similar manner. And it can be very discouraging in those plateau seasons to think like, am I just not making progress? Am I doing the right things? And a lot of time you are literally doing nothing wrong. It's just your body's way of processing the deficit that is different than someone that just sees those low weigh-ins every single day. So you got to be patient, you got to ride it out, and you got to know that your body is just responding in the best way that it can. So that is that. If you guys are watching the podcast episode, I just had to stop for a second because literally 20 motorcycles just passed while I'm trying to record this, of course. That's just how it works when you are podcasting or filming anything, is noises tend to just come out of the blue. But anyways, that is it from my calorie deficit update. I will film another update next week and hopefully we have whooshed by that point. That would be amazing. But even if it doesn't, I'm still going to stick with the course because your body is smart. And if you are doing the right things and you're doing them for like 2-3 weeks at a time and being consistent, that is what you need to do rather than not seeing a low in for a week and then wanting to quit. You got to ride it out. So we are riding it out right now. Saw some good progress in the beginning, which is keeping me going. But we're going to get there and it's going to be awesome. So let's dive into now the calorie deficit Q&A and the common questions that I get asked all the time about being in a calorie deficit. So question number 1. How do you know if a deficit is working/not working? And I feel like this goes with my update as a whole, but it can be very frustrating to be wondering, like, is my deficit working? And I think the number one thing to take into consideration with this is patience. Like, you are not going to see results with your calorie deficit in the first 1, 2, 3 weeks. Like, yes, you might see a little bit of weight loss on the scale. And yes, you might feel a little bit leaner, but it's not going to be earth shattering. And I think a lot of people are expecting earth shattering results in order to know if it's working. And in my opinion, that is not the case. Healthy fat loss is between half a pound to a pound per week. So even over the course of the month, you might only lose 2 to 4 pounds, but that is considered a 1000% win in my book and should be considered one in yours as well. So if you're not being patient and you aren't riding it out with plateaus and being consistent over 2 to 3 weeks that maybe you don't see a low weigh in, like, then you will not know if your calorie deficit is working. So you got to be consistent to know if your calorie deficit is working, number 1. Number 2, assess a few different data points. Don't just look at the scale, also look at progress photos and non-scale victories as well. So how are your pants fitting? How are you feeling as far as like your energy levels go? And how are you feeling as far as like leanness goes? Comparing your progress photos is so important. So many women are nervous to take progress photos because they're embarrassed, but they are so important when it comes to assessing your progress. So 100% recommend doing those 3 things. That way, if you aren't seeing progress on the scale, you're not just throwing in the towel. Because a lot of women, they're not seeing progress on the scale. I look at their progress photos and I'm like, damn girl, you are making so much progress. So you have to assess multiple things and not just be stuck in that scale mentality when you're on a deficit if you actually want to have longevity within the journey. So how you know it's working is if one of those 3 things is moving week to week. Some weeks you're going to feel like you're in a plateau and you might be on your period, you might have traveled, whatever. So we have to also take into consideration the consistency aspect, like have things been pretty much the same for 2 to 3 weeks and then making that call after that to know if it's working or not. Next question. How long does a deficit normally last? So this depends very, very, very on person to person. So when you go into a calorie deficit, I personally like to have a timeline. Sometimes timelines freak people out. So I kind of gauge when I'm coaching a client through this, like what camp they're in. But personally, I like to set a timeline for myself, and it's usually around 12 weeks. For this deficit I'm going to do it 8 weeks, and having a timeline helps kind of with like the motivation aspect because you're like, I can do this for 8 weeks rather than just going into it through like the perpetuity of the future. Like you just don't even know how long you're going to do it. I think that creates sometimes some like mindset barriers with that. But how long does a deficit normally last depends on the person. Depends on how much weight they need to lose. Someone that needs to lose 100 pounds, their deficit is going to look a lot different than someone who needs to lose 5 to 10 pounds. So it really depends on the person, and it also depends on how their body is responding to the deficit. If we get 16 weeks into the deficit and their body stops responding, it's super stressed and inflamed, we probably need to come out of the deficit because you're not going to see any more results from that. But it really depends on the person and also like their mindset around being in a calorie deficit and how they are tolerating it as well. So it really depends. I would say most people fall in like the 12 to 16 week calorie deficit. That's how long their body can tolerate it, and they can like mentally tolerate it as well. But some people can tolerate it for longer. Some people less than that, like me, I'm doing the 8 weeks, and who knows, maybe I'll continue it a little longer, but I really want to shoot for those 8 weeks. But that is that on how long a calorie deficit should last. There isn't like a yes or no answer. I always say like you are in the driver's seat of your fitness journey, and I'm just here to be the GPS to help get you there. So however much like weight you want to lose, how you want to feel really depends on you. Like, who am I, your coach, to say like you have to be this certain size? Like that would just be weird. So I think it depends on the person, it depends on their goals and what they want to get to. What results should I expect in a calorie deficit phase? So you should expect fat loss, number one. Number two, healthy fat loss, 0.5 to 1 pound per week is the healthy range. And so that is what you should expect. Also to fitting into smaller clothes, feeling leaner, all those things is what you should expect in a deficit phase. But I would say like a good rule of thumb is like a pound per week. So if you have a lot of weight to lose, you're probably going to be more so in that pound per week range. Whereas someone that has less to lose, like me, like I'm probably going to be more so in like the 0.5 pound per week kind of camp of things. So that's where a lot of people get like discouraged, is they're like, I'm not losing like a pound per week, but they were in a really lean state to begin with. So it's going to be harder for your body to give up body fat when you're already lean to begin with. Next question. Who should not do a deficit? So this is where a lot of people go wrong, is that they head into a deficit when they should not be. They have no business to be in a deficit. So people that are having hormonal issues, if they're sick, stressed, they're traveling a ton, their metabolism is already downregulated, those are all people that should not do a deficit. When you do a deficit, you're inherently adding stress to your body. Even though it's not like super stressful, your body sees undereating as a stress and it does things to adapt to that. So if you're already sick, if you are already having hormonal issues, if you're already extremely stressed out, adding more stress onto your plate, your body is just not going to respond to a deficit as well, or literally at all. I mentioned lots of travel. So yes, I have worked with many clients that have traveled for work, and they've traveled and done amazing in deficits. And I think that is awesome. But if you look at a phase of your life and you see, okay, I'm going to Europe for 2 weeks, I have like 4 work trips in the next 2 months, like that might not be the best time to head into a deficit. Like we can work on other things to make progress in different areas instead of being in a deficit. But what I find is that a lot of times it just adds more stress to your life, and you're not able to be as adherent. So it just prolongs the deficit even longer. And then the last one was your metabolism is not high. So a lot of women come to me and they have been under eating for a really long period of time. And so their metabolism is slow AF, and it needs actually some metabolic restoration and a reverse diet before even having any business trying to do a deficit. Because if you just head into a deficit and your calories are already low, you're not going to lose body fat because your metabolism is already down regulated. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I have a whole podcast episode about reverse diets if you want to learn more about reverse diets. But if you have been under eating for a long time, you have no business doing a deficit because you are actually in a deficit and your body has already down regulated to it. So that is the end of story with that. Next question. Why have calorie deficits in the past not worked for me? It goes back to the literal last question I was talking about. So you're number one, maybe you're not in enough of a deficit, and maybe you just calculated your deficit calories and your macros wrong. A lot of people think they're in a deficit and they're just not, because they either went to like an online calculator that sucked, or someone else gave them macros that sucked, or they feel like they are in a deficit and they're actually not, like they're overeating and just tracking wrong and having like bites, licks, and tastes of things, and those things are adding up and they're just not being consistent enough. So I would say more times than not, it's not like the deficit that's not working, it's user error, and it's doing the wrong amount of calories and then really not being real with yourself on how consistent you are being. Most people, when they actually start tracking, they realize, wow, I actually am not not eating a lot. Like I've worked with a lot of women that on our initial consult call, they're like, I literally don't eat anything. Like I barely eat breakfast. I have a really light lunch. I have dinner. And then I have them actually track their calories, what they're eating day to day. And they're going way over. Oh, I forgot about the few glasses of wine at night. I forgot about the giant meal I have over the weekend that actually causes them to be in a calorie surplus. So number one, you got to be real with yourself. You got to make sure you're doing the right calorie deficit. And you actually have to make sure your metabolism is in a spaced deficit, because if you're not, it's going to feel like an uphill battle and you're going to think that the calorie deficit doesn't work, but calorie deficits do work just for the right people that when their metabolism is rocking and rolling. Next question, how should meals look in a calorie deficit? So do not overcomplicate what your calorie intake looks like or what your meals look like in a maintenance phase versus a calorie deficit phase. All I do, this is very, very simple. I take my meals that I'm having in my maintenance phase and I just lessen the portions. So for instance, for dinner last night, I had a stir fry, veggies, chicken thighs, and rice. In a maintenance phase, I have like around a cup of rice. But in a deficit phase, I have half a cup of rice. Like I'm just using less of what I typically do. So that is how I personally like to coach calorie deficit meals. Another thing that you want to do is make sure that you're eating mostly whole foods, 80%, but don't cut out the unhealthy foods either. Still have the Oreo from time to time, the drink from time to time. Like I think it's very important to have that balance, especially when you are in a calorie deficit. So that way you're not like, I need to be 100% perfect. And then you burn out 4 weeks into the deficit or less. So definitely have a balance, but make sure to prioritize mostly whole foods because that will make you feel your best. Next question. How to calculate my calorie deficit? So this is where a lot of people go wrong, is that they go onto MyFitnessPal or a different tracking app and they want to lose 2-3 pounds a week. And that puts them into way too extreme of a deficit, which then leads them to quitting week 2 weeks in or that binge restrict cycle, which is what we don't want. We want to have enough of a calorie deficit where we're losing body fat, but not too much where we're absolutely starving and feeling miserable for ourselves. So I would say a 10 to 20% deficit for most people is the sweet spot. So for most women, that's looking at like 300 to 500 calories deducted from what they are maintaining at. So that is going to be kind of like that sweet spot for most people. Sometimes they will have to do a little bit more of a deficit, sometimes less, and their body will respond. But my personal opinion is that I want you to be able to lose body fat at the highest amount of calories possible, because you're going to have so much more longevity to your journey, and you're going to actually make more progress long term because you're not just slashing calories the first time around and then having nowhere to go from there. Whereas if we go down maybe 300 calories and then 2 months from so from then, maybe you're plateauing a little bit, we can add or we can deduct a little bit more. And so it's all about strategy when it comes to the deficit. So definitely recommend not cutting down any more than 500 calories for fat loss, especially if you don't want to be miserable and starving and feel awful. So, okay. Is it possible to build muscle in a deficit? So this answer is there's a little bit of a gray area, and there's people that say yes, there's people that say no. From my personal experience working with clients, yes, some people can build muscle in a calorie deficit, but it's a very specific group of people. It's the ones that get the newbie gains, quote unquote. So the people that have never weight trained before or have maybe inconsistently weight trained and not really been doing the right things, if they're in a deficit, I have seen those clients build muscle. Now, if you're a seasoned weight trainer, if you've been doing this for a while, like someone like me, I will not build muscle in a calorie deficit. And if I am building muscle, it's a very small amount that would not be noticeable. So yes, you can if you are in that very newbie phase. And it's honestly awesome when a woman comes to me and they've never strength trained before and we're heading into a deficit, because I see them putting on muscle and losing body fat. And it's just like this amazing transformation. And it makes me want to go back in my own journey and actually weight train, because I completely messed myself up in that arena, but it's okay. We are not going to think about that. But it is sometimes possible for those women in the very newbie gain phase. But if you've been weight training for 6 months to a year, you're probably not going to build much muscle in a calorie deficit. You're going to need to be at maintenance or in a site surplus to do that, ideally. Okay. How to know if your body is ready for a deficit after a reverse diet. So, a lot of ladies come to me, they need to reverse diet. And then the question is always, when can I head into a deficit? Because reverse dieting for most women, it's so that they can get their metabolism back high. So then we can cut back down and lose the body fat. So, your body is ready for a calorie deficit if you have been at maintenance for around 3 months or ideally more. Think about how long a lot of these women have been under eating. Like a lot of women I talk to have been dieting, fad dieting, under eating for 6 months, years, multiple years, decades. So like your body's not going to completely undo all of that damage in 1 month. You have to be at maintenance for at least 3 months, in my opinion, to get the most out of it. Like, why would you reverse diet all the way back up just to head into a calorie deficit that didn't work because you just didn't spend enough time at maintenance? Those 3 months are so important. And I call it our metabolic restoration phase because that's where we're like really resetting your hunger hormones. You're resetting your hormones in general. We're resetting our metabolism and really giving it a dying chance and a fair shot at actually losing body fat once and for all. And you got to be patient. Those 3 months are so, 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 so important. I can't even express it enough how important those are. And if you don't do that, you're going to experience probably the same cycle that you have in years past. So 1000%, don't just reverse diet to head immediately into a deficit. Stay there for around 3 months and you will thank yourself 100% when your body's actually able to lose body fat, and then keep it off. And then after your dieting phase, you can reverse diet again, and then your metabolism is back to beautiful normalcy. So that is all the questions I have for today. I think that this covered a lot of ground. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to DM me on Instagram. My inbox is open for you. But I really appreciate all of you listening. If you could leave me a review, rating, follow me, whatever, that would really, really help on this podcast to let me know that you all are enjoying it as well. But hopefully everyone has a great rest of your week, and I will chat with you next week. Bye.